in the heart of Renaissance Italy, where politics and power were as fluid as the rivers that carved through the land. The Borgia family rose to prominence in ways both ruthless and strategic. A name synonymous with intrigue, scandal, and ambition, the Borgias stood at the crossroads of religion, politics, and military conquest. The patriarch of this ambitious family, Rodrigo Borgia, ascended to the papacy in 1492 under the name Pope Alexander VI. His rise to power was not by divine fate alone, but rather through shrewd manipulation, familial alliances, and a willingness to engage in the politics of deceit that characterized the age. Rodrigo's children were no less ambitious. His son Cesare, a brilliant and ruthless military strategist, would carve his path through the blood-soaked fields of Italy, commanding armies and securing territories. Yet, it was his sister, Lucrezia Borgia, whose life would become a true testament to the Borgia family's extraordinary ability to wield power. From a young age, Lucrezia was caught in the delicate dance of political alliances and family loyalty. Her fate woven into the web of power and ambition spun by her father and brother. Lucrezia's story begins in a world where power was a currency traded in secret chambers and alliances sealed in blood. As the beautiful, intelligent, and politically astute daughter of Pope Alexander VI, she became both a pawn and a player in the dangerous games of Renaissance Italy. Her marriages, each more strategically important than the last, were the keys to unlocking greater influence, both for herself and for her brother Cesare. For Cesare, whose dreams of conquering Italy were as grand as his military victories, Lucrezia was not just a sister, but a vital ally, an instrument of diplomacy whose beauty and connections could secure alliances and fortify his ambitions. Yet, for all her role in the ambitious designs of the Borgia family, Lucrezia's life was far from simple. Her story was one of complex relationships, a quest for power, and, perhaps most poignantly, a search for personal identity in a world where her destiny was shaped by the men around her. While the world whispered about her scandals and affairs, the true story of Lucrezia Borgia lies in her resilience, her political acumen, and the deep, unshakable bond she shared with her brother Cesare, a bond that would define the fate of both their lives. In this story, we will uncover the truths behind the rumors, explore the political machinations of the Borgia family, and reveal how Lucrezia's life intertwined with Caesar's rise and fall. Her journey through marriage, power struggles, and family loyalty paints a portrait of a woman who, despite the scandals surrounding her name, was a master of survival in the volatile world of Renaissance Italy. From her early years in the shadow of her father's papacy to her role in Caesar's ambitious campaigns, Lucrezia Borgia's story is one of calculated moves, tragic losses, and political brilliance, a story that mirrors the turbulent era in which she lived. As the Borgia name echoes through the halls of history, so too does Lucrezia's influence, a woman whose life was shaped by the ambition of those around her, but whose own resilience and intelligence carved a path that would make her one of the most fascinating figures of the Renaissance. In the end, it is her relationship with Cesare that stands as the defining force of her legacy. A bond that would shape their destinies, both for better and for worse. This is the story of Lucrezia Borgia, sister, wife, mother, and political mastermind, whose influence on Cesare and the Borgia family would echo through the annals of history. Lucrezia Borgia was born in 1480, in a time when Italy was a patchwork of warring city-states, each vying for control, power, and influence. Her birthplace, Rome, was at the very heart of this political turmoil, a city where the fate of empires often rested in the hands of a few key figures. But for Lucrezia, her childhood would not be one of simple innocence. She was the daughter of Rodrigo Borgia, a man who would rise to the papacy under the name Pope Alexander VI, and Vanna Catene, a woman who was both his mistress and confidant. From the very start, Lucrezia's life was destined to be entwined with the ambitions of her father and his powerful, often ruthless, plans for the future of the Borgia family. Rodrigo Borgia, before ascending to the papacy, was already a man of considerable power. Born into a noble family in Spain, his ambitious rise through the church was fueled by both his intellect and a keen understanding of the politics of the Vatican. By the time Lucrezia was born, he was a well-established figure in Rome's political scene. Her father's election as pope in 1492 was the crowning achievement of his ambitions. And it opened up new paths of power for the Borgia family. But it also marked the beginning of the family's notoriety. For Lucrezia, the papacy of her father meant a life in the public eye, one filled with both privilege and scandal. From the moment of her birth, Lucrezia's beauty was apparent, and it quickly became a notable asset in her father's plans. She was not just a child, but a political tool, a pawn in the complex game of alliances that Rodrigo played to strengthen his own position and that of his family. Though she was still young, Lucrezia would soon understand that her future was not of her own making. Instead, it was dictated by the ever-shifting tides of power that ran through the veins of the Borgia family. In the early years of her life, Lucrezia's education was focused on the arts, music, and literature, subjects deemed appropriate for the daughter of a high-ranking nobleman. She was an intelligent young woman, and her wit and charm were already being honed as tools for future alliances. But beyond this, she also learned the intricacies of politics and diplomacy, lessons passed down from her father. Lucrezia was raised in an environment that demanded both beauty and intellect. For she would need both to secure her place in the complex, often dangerous world of Renaissance Italy. Yet, even as she was groomed for political life, Lucrezia's early years were marked by personal confusion and heartache. Her mother, Vanazza, was often absent due to her relationship with Rodrigo, and the atmosphere in the Borgia household was one of constant tension. Rodrigo's many affairs and his brutal pursuit of power left little room for affection or stability. Still, Lucrezia found comfort in her siblings, especially Cesare, who would come to play a pivotal role in her life. Cesare Borgia, her older brother, was already a figure of great importance within the Borgia household. Like their father, Cesare had a sharp mind for strategy and a natural ability to lead. Though he was still young, he was already involved in the political schemes that were taking shape under the papacy of Alexander VI. It was clear early on that Cesare would be his father's right hand, destined for military command and political power. But while Rodrigo Borgia's attention was often focused on Cesare, Lucrezia played an important, if subtle, role in his success. As Caesar's power grew, so too did Lucrezia's importance within the family. While Cesare dominated the military and political landscape, Lucrezia's role was to be more behind the scenes. Her marriage alliances and social connections carefully chosen to help strengthen the family's position. She was not yet a player in her own right, but she would become one in time. Her first significant step into the political arena came at the age of 13. When she was betrothed to Giovanni Sforza, the son of a powerful Milanese noble family. The marriage was arranged not for love, but for the political advantage it offered the Borgias. The Sforza family controlled a key region in northern Italy, and the union would help solidify the Borgias' position in the complex network of Italian politics. However, this first marriage would prove to be more of a burden than a blessing, marking the beginning of a series of marriages that would define much of Lucrezia's life. Despite the political necessity of the marriage, Lucrezia was not yet fully aware of the weight of her family's expectations. Her beauty, intelligence, and grace were assets that she would soon realize were both her greatest strengths and her greatest limitations. She had little say in the marriages that were arranged for her, and her personal desires were often secondary to the ambitions of her father and brother. Lucrezia's life as a young woman was one of contrasts. She was at once the darling of the Italian courts, adored for her beauty and charm, yet also a subject of vicious rumors and scandal. Her father's infamous reputation, her brother's violent rise to power, and the political intrigues surrounding her family all made her a target for gossip. Yet, despite the whispers that followed her, Lucrezia held on to her poise and grace, using her intelligence and beauty to navigate the treacherous waters of Renaissance politics. At this point, Lucrezia had no inkling of the full extent to which her life would be shaped by the ambitions of her father and brother. She was still a young woman, still learning the art of survival in a world ruled by powerful men. However, the time was coming when her life would be inextricably tied to Caesar's, and the two would become the most formidable siblings in Italy, united in their pursuit of power and revenge. In the years to come, as the political winds shifted and the Borgia family's grip on power tightened. Lucrezia's role would evolve from a political pawn to a key figure in the strategy that would shape Renaissance Italy. Her influence would be felt not only in the courts and marriage beds of Italy but also in the very military campaigns of her brother Cesare, who would come to rely on her not just as a sister, but as an ally in his quest for domination. As the Borgia family's legacy began to take shape, Lucrezia's story would be written not just in the alliances she formed, but in the bloodshed, betrayal, and ambition that defined the age. The early years of her life set the stage for the woman she would become, a woman who would balance love, duty, and ambition in a world that demanded much and offered little in return. At the tender age of 13, Lucrezia Borgia's life took its first significant turn in the direction that would forever entwine her fate with the political machinations of her family. Her marriage to Giovanni Sforza, the son of the Duke of Milan, was arranged not out of affection, but purely for the benefit of the Borgia family's ambitions. This union, orchestrated by her father, Pope Alexander VI, and her brother, Cesare, was part of a larger plan to secure power in northern Italy, an essential piece in their ever-expanding web of influence. Giovanni Sforza was a nobleman of considerable rank, but his marriage to Lucrezia was far more than a romantic alliance. The Sforza family controlled Milan, one of the richest and most strategically important cities in Italy at the time. By marrying into this powerful family, the Borgias hoped to solidify their own power in the region and protect their interests in the complex world of Italian politics. For Lucrezia, it was the first step in a life where personal desires and aspirations would always take a backseat to the ambitions of her father and brother. The wedding, a lavish affair, was held in Rome in 1493. Lucrezia, beautiful and poised, was paraded before the courts of Italy as the latest prize in the Borgia family's pursuit of dominance. Her marriage was celebrated as a political triumph, but the young bride would quickly realize that her life was no longer her own. She was thrust into a world of intrigue, where alliances were as fragile as glass, and personal happiness was often sacrificed for the greater good of the family. Despite the outward appearance of a successful union, Lucrezia's marriage to Giovanni Sforza soon began to reveal its cracks. The young bride, barely out of childhood, found herself married to a man she barely knew, a man who was politically powerful but personally distant and unremarkable. The marriage was strained from the outset, as Giovanni lacked the strength of character and the political acumen that Lucrezia's father, Pope Alexander VI, had hoped for in a son-in-law. Lucrezia, who had been raised to understand the intricacies of politics, found herself in a union that failed to offer the support or influence that was expected. Giovanni's lack of ambition was at odds with the Borgia family's grand designs. He was content to remain a figurehead, while the real power in the marriage, as with all matters in the Borgia family, was wielded by Lucrezia's father, Rodrigo. This imbalance became evident as the months passed, and Lucrezia began to understand that her marriage, like everything in her life, was not based on love or personal choice but rather the cold, calculating moves of her father and brother to secure the family's position. The marriage to Giovanni Sforza was short-lived. Rumors began to swirl in the courts of Italy that the marriage had never been consummated, and that Lucrezia had been coerced into it under duress. These rumors, fueled by the ever-present gossip surrounding the Borgia family, began to take on a life of their own. The whispers suggested that the marriage had been nothing more than a political facade, a union that had never been real and had no basis in affection. For Lucrezia, this was the first taste of the scandal that would follow her for the rest of her life. Despite the rumors, the marriage was officially dissolved in 1497, a mere 4 years after it had begun. The political ramifications of this dissolution were significant, as it created a rift between the Borgia family and the Sforza family, who felt betrayed by the annulment. The public nature of the divorce and the scandal that surrounded it did little to improve the reputation of the Borgia family, and it marked the first instance of Lucrezia being thrust into the center of a political storm that was beyond her control. For Lucrezia, the end of her marriage to Giovanni Sforza was a moment of profound personal upheaval. The annulment, while beneficial for her family, was a blow to her own sense of self-worth. She was left to navigate a world where her beauty and charm were often viewed as assets to be used. And her emotions were secondary to the needs of her father and brother. Her role in the marriage had been purely political. And when it fell apart, she was once again forced to align herself with the desires of the Borgia family rather than her own. Yet, in the aftermath of the divorce, Lucrezia's influence within the Borgia family began to grow. The dissolution of her first marriage, while scandalous, allowed her to enter into a new phase of her life, one where her strategic value was only beginning to be realized. For Cesare, her brother, the breakup with the Sforza family was not a loss, but a new opportunity. He saw that Lucrezia, as a politically attractive and unencumbered young woman, could be married off again to further the Borgia family's interests. The end of her first marriage also set the stage for her second marriage, this time to Alfonso d'Aragona, a prince from the Kingdom of Naples. The union would prove to be of even greater political significance than her first. While Giovanni Sforza had been a political ally, Alfonso d'Aragona was far more influential, and his marriage to Lucrezia would allow the Borgias to further extend their power in southern Italy. However, it was not just her father and brother who saw the potential in this union. Lucrezia too was beginning to realize that her personal feelings and desires were often secondary to the larger political game she had been drawn into. The political significance of her second marriage became apparent almost immediately. Alfonso was a powerful figure in the Kingdom of Naples, and his marriage to Lucrezia was a direct challenge to the growing influence of the French in the region. The union provided the Borgias with an invaluable ally in the south. And once again, Lucrezia became a pawn in the complex geopolitical chess game of Renaissance Italy. But unlike her first marriage, this one would not dissolve so easily. And Lucrezia would soon find herself in the midst of a new set of political intrigues and personal sacrifices. As Lucrezia's second marriage to Alfonso began, she found herself living in a delicate balance. Her personal life was increasingly dictated by the strategic needs of her family. And her ability to navigate the world of Renaissance politics would become one of her greatest assets. She was no longer the naive girl she had been at the time of her marriage to Giovanni Sforza. The harsh lessons learned in the wake of her first marriage shaped her into a more calculating and resilient figure. One who understood that power was the true currency of her world. As the years passed, Lucrezia's political role would continue to evolve, and her influence in her brother Caesar's career would grow. With each marriage and political alliance, she became a more central figure in the Borgia family's plans for domination. But her second marriage, though politically advantageous, would soon take a tragic turn, one that would once again bring Lucrezia face to face with the darker side of her family's ambitions. In the end, Lucrezia Borgia's first marriage had been a mere stepping stone. The dissolution of her union with Giovanni Sforza marked the beginning of a more complex and politically charged chapter in her life. Her experiences in these early years would shape her into a woman capable of surviving in a world where power, loyalty, and ambition dictated the course of her destiny. As she moved into her second marriage, her path was set, and she would become an even more influential force in the Borgia family's quest for control and dominance in Italy. As the 16th century dawned, the Borgia family was at the peak of its power, with Pope Alexander VI firmly in control of the papacy and his children, Cesare and Lucrezia, becoming increasingly central to his schemes. Cesare Borgia, the eldest son, was a young man of remarkable ambition, intelligence, and military prowess. Though still in his early 20s, Cesare had already begun to carve out a path for himself that would make him one of the most feared and admired figures in Italy. His rise, however, would not have been possible without the significant role played by his sister, Lucrezia. Caesar's ambitions were vast and ruthless. He envisioned a unified and powerful state in central Italy, one that he could rule as its prince. His dream was to extend the reach of the Borgia family beyond the Vatican, and in this, he saw himself as a modern-day Machiavellian leader, a leader who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. To do so, Cesare understood that alliances were crucial, and that family ties were the key to forming such alliances. His sister, Lucrezia, was central to his political strategy. Unlike her first two marriages, which had been little more than pawns in her father's game, Lucrezia's third marriage to Alfonso of Aragon in 1500 would play a far more significant role in shaping the Borgia family's political fortunes. Alfonso was a member of the powerful Aragonese family from the Kingdom of Naples, and his marriage to Lucrezia was arranged to solidify the Borgias' influence in the south of Italy. However, Cesare saw even more potential in this union. The marriage was an important piece in his broader plan to conquer the central regions of Italy and expand his territory. Alfonso's political weight, along with Lucrezia's charm and intelligence, would help ensure that Caesar's ambitions were supported by powerful figures in the region. Lucrezia's role in her brother's plans went beyond mere diplomacy. She was not just a vessel for political alliances, she became an active participant in the strategic discussions of the Borgia family. Her ability to manage relationships with key players in Italy, from local nobles to foreign powers, made her an invaluable asset to Cesare. It was not just her marriages that made her a crucial part of the Borgia machine, but her keen political mind and her capacity for patience and discretion. Where Caesar's ruthless military tactics and strategic brilliance made him feared, Lucrezia's charm and diplomatic skill allowed her to soften the harsh edges of her brother's ambitions. In many ways, Lucrezia became Caesar's eyes and ears in the courts and halls where he could not easily tread. Her charm and beauty were well known, and they opened doors for her in circles that Cesare could not easily penetrate. Through Lucrezia, Cesare was able to maintain a delicate network of alliances that would ultimately serve his military campaigns. But perhaps more importantly, Lucrezia provided emotional and psychological support for Cesare, who, despite his brilliant mind and calculating ambition, could not afford to show weakness. Caesar's vision for Italy was a harsh one. He sought to consolidate power by any means necessary, even if it meant resorting to deception, manipulation, and violence. He had already secured large swaths of land in central Italy, using both diplomacy and force to bring regions like Romagna and the Marche under his control. However, Caesar's desire for even more power, specifically his ambition to acquire the Papal States and unite them with his own holdings, would lead him down a darker path. The complex political landscape in which he operated was treacherous, and even the smallest misstep could lead to his downfall. Lucrezia, understanding the stakes of her brother's ambitions, navigated this complex political terrain with grace. Her role in supporting Cesare extended far beyond personal loyalty. It was a calculated effort to protect the family and secure their position in the ever-shifting political landscape. She had already witnessed the consequences of her father's ambition and the lengths to which Cesare was willing to go in pursuit of his goals. But while Caesar's ambitions were clear, Lucrezia's position was more precarious. Her loyalty to her brother was both her greatest strength and her greatest weakness. In the years following her marriage to Alfonso, Lucrezia became a central figure in the power struggles that gripped Italy. Her intelligence and political savvy allowed her to serve as an intermediary between Cesare and the powerful figures of Italy. She was particularly valuable in managing relationships with the various noble families that Cesare sought to ally with, or, in some cases, manipulate. The dynamics of these alliances were complex and fragile, and Lucrezia's ability to maintain stability within them was essential. Yet, as Caesar's ambition grew, so did the dangers surrounding him. His brutal tactics, his thirst for control, and his increasing disregard for the lives of others began to alienate some of his allies. The conquest of Romagna, once seen as a brilliant military success, led to growing resentment from local leaders who now found themselves under Caesar's iron grip. The violence that accompanied Caesar's expansion was not easily forgotten, and in time, it would lead to his downfall. But Lucrezia was not blind to the risks that Caesar's unchecked ambition posed. While she supported him wholeheartedly, she also knew the importance of maintaining a delicate balance in the political landscape. She worked tirelessly to ensure that the Borgia family's actions did not provoke too much backlash from the powerful families of Italy, particularly those who had the ability to challenge the Borgias' growing influence. In many ways, Lucrezia became the moral counterbalance to Caesar's ruthlessness. While Cesare was willing to employ any means necessary to achieve his goals, Lucrezia took a more nuanced approach, carefully considering the long-term implications of every political move. Where Cesare would strike quickly and decisively, Lucrezia would work behind the scenes to smooth over conflicts, ease tensions, and maintain the alliances that were essential to their success. The bond between Cesare and Lucrezia was undeniably strong. It was a partnership built on mutual respect, shared ambition, and, perhaps most importantly, the understanding that their fates were intertwined. As Cesare continued his campaigns to expand the Borgias' territory, he relied more and more on Lucrezia's diplomatic abilities and her understanding of the political world. The stakes of their actions were enormous, and Lucrezia, as her brother's most trusted ally, was always at the center of it all. But even as Caesar's power grew, the forces that would eventually bring him down were already in motion. The death of Pope Alexander VI in 1503 marked the beginning of the end for Cesare. His father's death removed the stabilizing force that had kept the Borgia family in power, and the resulting political vacuum led to chaos. Cesare, who had relied so heavily on his father's papal authority, suddenly found himself exposed to enemies both within and outside of the Borgia family. Though the tides of fortune began to turn against Cesare, Lucrezia remained by his side. But even as her brother's world began to crumble, Lucrezia knew that she would have to navigate the shifting political landscape with caution. The Borgia family was in danger, and the cost of loyalty was about to be tested in ways neither sibling could have anticipated. In the years that followed, Lucrezia's role in Caesar's plans would evolve. While her brother's ambitions faltered, Lucrezia would find new ways to secure her own future, through her marriage to Alfonso d'Este, and later, through her stewardship of Ferrara. But throughout it all, her bond with Cesare would remain a defining feature of her life. A connection that would continue to shape the course of both their fates in a world that had grown increasingly uncertain. In the end, Caesar's ambitions would be his undoing. But Lucrezia's story would continue to unfold, one marked not by military conquests, but by political survival and resilience in the face of the collapsing Borgia Empire. Despite the challenges, she would outlast the storms of history, her legacy a testament to the quiet yet profound influence she had on the life of her brother, and on the history of Renaissance Italy. In 1500, as Cesare Borgia's military campaign in central Italy reached its peak and the Borgia family's influence expanded, Lucrezia Borgia found herself embroiled in another pivotal moment of her life. This time, it was not a marriage arranged to strengthen alliances or secure land, but one that would solidify the Borgia family's ties to one of the most powerful kingdoms in Italy, the Kingdom of Naples. Lucrezia's second marriage, this time to Alfonso d'Aragona, was a critical piece in Caesar's broader political ambitions and would shape the course of her life in ways both tragic and transformative. Alfonso d'Aragona, the son of King Ferdinand II of Naples, was a handsome, well-educated noble with a powerful lineage. His marriage to Lucrezia was not born out of love, but out of the necessity of political calculation. Pope Alexander VI, Lucrezia's father, sought to strengthen the Borgia family's control over the southern Italian territories, particularly the Kingdom of Naples, which was strategically important in the ongoing power struggle among the various Italian city-states. With the marriage to Alfonso, Alexander hoped to solidify an alliance with the Aragonese family and gain more influence over the Kingdom of Naples, which would be a valuable asset for his son Caesar's military conquests. For Lucrezia, the marriage to Alfonso d'Aragona was the second significant union she had entered into. But this marriage, unlike the first, was far more politically charged. Alfonso was a man of considerable importance in southern Italy, and the union with him would bring the Borgias into direct contact with the power dynamics of Naples. Lucrezia's role as a political figure had been solidified, but the personal consequences of this marriage were about to unfold. Lucrezia was a woman who had already been through a tumultuous marriage with Giovanni Sforza, a man who had never lived up to the expectations of her family. Her first marriage had been little more than a political tool, and its dissolution left a stain on her reputation, despite her father's attempts to downplay the scandal. Now, with Alfonso, Lucrezia was being asked to play a different role. She was not just a political pawn but a vital part of a much larger plan. Her marriage to Alfonso d'Aragona had immediate implications for the Borgia family, as it positioned them more firmly within the southern power structure of Italy. But it would also present challenges that Lucrezia could never have anticipated. The early years of the marriage were marked by political turbulence and personal tension. Alfonso, unlike Giovanni, was a man of stronger character and presence. Yet their relationship was far from ideal. Lucrezia's role in their marriage was clear. She was to be the Borgia family's representative at the Neapolitan court, managing relationships with Alfonso's family and securing alliances that would benefit Caesar's military endeavors. But her personal feelings, as always, took a backseat to the political ambitions of her family. Despite her beauty, charm, and intelligence, Lucrezia was still viewed more as a tool of political diplomacy than a woman with personal agency. It quickly became apparent that Lucrezia's marriage to Alfonso was fraught with complications. Despite their shared bloodline and the political strength Alfonso brought to the union, tensions between the Borgias and the Aragonese family simmered beneath the surface. Alfonso's role in the marriage had been to strengthen the Borgia position in Naples. But this had not made him a popular figure among certain factions within the kingdom. The power struggle between the Borgia family and other noble factions in Naples intensified. And Alfonso's standing as a political figure became increasingly precarious. Perhaps the most difficult aspect of Lucrezia's second marriage was the fact that it forced her into a situation where her brother Caesar's ambitions took precedence over her own happiness. Cesare, whose military campaigns had already won him significant territories in central Italy, now saw the Kingdom of Naples as the next major prize. The marriage between Lucrezia and Alfonso was a stepping stone in Caesar's larger plan to extend his influence southward. And it would have been difficult for Lucrezia to ignore her brother's plans. Alfonso himself became a tool of Caesar's political designs. As Lucrezia settled into her role as wife and political figure, she came to see that Alfonso's presence in the Borgia family's strategies was far more complex than she had initially expected. Caesar's campaign for further control of Italy had no place for personal loyalty or tenderness, only the unrelenting pursuit of power. Alfonso's status as the husband of Lucrezia placed him squarely in the line of fire when Caesar's ambitions in Naples began to heat up. Though Cesare outwardly maintained cordial relations with his brother-in-law, he had his own plans for the kingdom. The tension between Alfonso and Cesare reached a boiling point when Caesar's forces began to make moves to extend Borgia influence over Naples. Alfonso, understandably, found himself caught between his loyalty to his family and the pressure from the Borgias to align with Caesar's ambitions. As a result, the political pressure on Alfonso escalated, and the personal conflict between him and Cesare deepened, while Lucrezia, ever the dutiful wife, tried to maintain the peace. It was clear that the marriage was strained by the increasingly hostile political environment. Tragically, the tension that had been building for months would soon erupt into violence. In 1500, Alfonso d'Aragona was murdered under suspicious circumstances. Although the circumstances of his death remain unclear to this day, there is strong evidence to suggest that Cesare Borgia was involved in orchestrating his murder. The reasons for Alfonso's death are often debated, but it is widely believed that Cesare, in his quest to secure Naples for himself, saw Alfonso as an obstacle to his goals. The murder sent shockwaves through the Borgia family, and Lucrezia was left to deal with the aftermath of her husband's untimely death. For Lucrezia, the murder of Alfonso was a devastating blow. Despite the political motivations that had underpinned their marriage, she had come to care for him in her own way. Her grief was compounded by the guilt that came from knowing that her brother, the man she had supported and trusted, had orchestrated the death of her husband. The murder of Alfonso d'Aragona marked the first major tragedy in Lucrezia's life. And it would be a defining moment for her, shaping the course of her future. In the aftermath of Alfonso's death, Lucrezia found herself once again thrust into the center of political intrigue. The marriage, which had been one of political necessity, ended in bloodshed, leaving Lucrezia once more a widow, this time in the midst of growing suspicion and scandal. Her brother Caesar's role in the murder further tarnished the Borgia family's already sullied reputation. And Lucrezia's own standing was compromised by her connection to the crime. Yet, even as she struggled with the consequences of Alfonso's death, she remained fiercely loyal to her family. In her mind, her duty to the Borgia name and the political ambitions of her brother would always come first. no matter the personal cost. However, Lucrezia's role in the Borgia family was not finished. Her life would continue to be shaped by political alliances and marriage contracts. And she would soon find herself entering into yet another marriage, one that would offer her a new opportunity to secure her family's future. But as she looked back on the loss of Alfonso, she could not help but reflect on how much of her life had been shaped by the ambitions of the men around her. In the ever-shifting world of Renaissance Italy, Lucrezia Borgia would continue to be both a pawn and a player. Her every move dictated by the ruthless ambitions of her father and brother. The murder of Alfonso d'Aragona was a turning point for Lucrezia. She was no longer the innocent, politically naive young woman she had once been. The painful lessons she had learned through her marriages, especially the tragedy of Alfonso's death, would shape her future decisions and her political maneuvering in ways that would ensure her survival in a volatile and dangerous world. The papacy of Alexander VI, or Rodrigo Borgia, was a period marked by extraordinary power, scandal, and intrigue. When he ascended to the papal throne in 1492, few could have predicted the extent to which the Borgia family would dominate the politics of Renaissance Italy. Under his rule, the Vatican became not just a religious center, but a political powerhouse. His reign was marked by lavish displays of wealth, ruthless maneuvering, and a willingness to do whatever was necessary to maintain his power and influence. And as the daughter of Pope Alexander VI, Lucrezia Borgia was thrust into the very heart of this political storm. For Lucrezia, the years during her father's papacy were formative. Her life, already entangled in the ambitions of her family, became even more tightly woven into the political and military affairs that her father controlled. Pope Alexander VI was a master at using his position to further the Borgia family's goals. He dispensed papal favors to his children, arranging powerful marriages, political alliances, and military conquests. Cesare, his son, was groomed for leadership, while Lucrezia was used as a tool of diplomacy, her marriages and alliances serving to secure the Borgia family's hold on power. From the very beginning of his papacy, Pope Alexander VI made it clear that his family came first. He employed a combination of nepotism and cunning diplomacy to ensure the Borgia name would flourish. Through political marriages, alliances, and the manipulation of powerful factions, he created a vast network of influence. Lucrezia's marriages were central to this strategy, each union carefully designed to further the Borgia family's objectives. Pope Alexander VI's hold on the papacy was far from secure, and he faced many challenges from both within the church and from rival political factions. The Papal States were a chaotic collection of territories that were often at odds with one another. To maintain his power, Pope Alexander VI relied on his children, especially Cesare, his military-minded son, and on his daughter Lucrezia, whose diplomatic and social skills helped to smooth over tensions with the powerful families of Italy. While Cesare rose to prominence in the military and political spheres, Lucrezia was the Borgia family's emissary in the courts of Italy and Europe. Her beauty, grace, and intelligence made her a highly sought-after asset, and her father's manipulation of her marriages was a key part of his plan to increase the family's political reach. Yet, Lucrezia's role in the family's ambitions was far more significant than just being a pawn in her father's game. In addition to her marriages, Lucrezia played a crucial role in her father's strategies. She was not just a passive participant in the Borgia family's schemes, she was an active, calculating figure who understood the political landscape of Renaissance Italy better than most. Her position within the Borgia household allowed her to influence the decisions of her father and brother, acting as an intermediary between various factions and using her charm to maintain alliances. While Cesare wielded military power, Lucrezia used diplomacy to secure the family's position in the shifting sands of Italian politics. The papacy of Alexander VI also marked a period of extraordinary corruption within the church. Alexander VI was known for his lavish spending, his involvement in numerous scandals, and his open nepotism. The Vatican under his rule was less a seat of religious power than a political empire that served the ambitions of the Borgia family. Lucrezia, caught in the web of her father's manipulations, was subject to the scrutiny and gossip that surrounded the Borgia name. The Vatican's moral authority had eroded under the weight of the Borgia family's actions. And it was impossible for anyone in Rome, or in Europe, to separate the papacy from the scandal that followed it. In many ways, Lucrezia's life was a reflection of the Borgia family's actions. Her father's papacy, with all its excess and corruption, shaped the course of her life in ways that no one could have predicted. While Caesar's military campaigns and political ambitions made him the most visible member of the Borgia family, it was Lucrezia who often had to bear the brunt of the family's scandalous reputation. Her role as the beautiful, enigmatic daughter of the Pope made her both a pawn and a symbol of the family's power. The gossip and rumors about her personal life were amplified by the political machinations of her father. And as a result, she became the subject of fascination, suspicion, and scandal. However, Lucrezia's relationship with her father was more complex than the public perception of her as a mere tool of his political ambitions. Pope Alexander VI had a deep, almost protective affection for his daughter, and he relied on her more than he did on his sons for managing the family's connections and alliances, as much as he used Lucrezia to further the Borgia family's interests. He also valued her intelligence and ability to navigate the treacherous waters of Renaissance politics, while the world saw her as a beautiful pawn in her father's game. Within the Borgia household, Lucrezia was a trusted and capable ally. The papacy of Alexander VI was a defining period in the life of Lucrezia Borgia. It was during these years that she began to understand the full extent of the power and danger surrounding her family. Her marriages were not just political tools, they were a means to an end. And as the political tides of Italy shifted, so too did her role within the Borgia family. Lucrezia was no longer just a pawn on the chessboard of Renaissance politics. She had become a player in her own right, capable of wielding influence and power in ways that few others could. Despite the power her family held, the papacy of Alexander VI was not without its challenges. His reign was marked by constant conflict, both internal and external. The papal states were frequently besieged by enemies, and the Borgia family had to fight to maintain their hold on power. The Vatican was not the only power center in Italy. Rival families like the Medici, the Sforza, and the Orsini also vied for control. Yet, through it all, the Borgias managed to hold their ground, with Lucrezia playing a crucial role in the delicate diplomacy that allowed the family to maintain their influence. As the years passed, the papacy of Alexander VI grew increasingly unstable. Political enemies began to circle, and Pope Alexander VI's hold on power began to weaken. The alliances he had so carefully built began to unravel, and the Borgia family's position in Italy became more tenuous. The death of Alexander VI in 1503 marked the end of an era for the Borgias. The loss of the Pope was a devastating blow to the family, and it would signal the beginning of the end for the once great Borgia dynasty. For Lucrezia, her father's death was both a tragedy and a turning point, while the loss of Pope Alexander VI marked the collapse of the family's political power. It also presented an opportunity for her to carve out a life for herself independent of the Borgia name. Her marriage to Alfonso d'Este, which had begun as a political alliance, now became a path to stability and power in Ferrara, a city-state in northern Italy. Though she would never escape the shadow of her family's legacy, Lucrezia's future would no longer be defined by her father's papacy or her brother's military campaigns. Instead, she would find a new role for herself, one that would allow her to emerge from the chaos of the Borgia years and establish a legacy of her own. In the end, the papacy of Alexander VI was a period of both triumph and tragedy for the Borgia family. It was a time of unparalleled power and influence, but also one of excess, corruption, and scandal. For Lucrezia, it was the formative period of her life, one that would shape her into a woman capable of surviving in the turbulent world of Renaissance Italy. The papacy of her father was the backdrop against which she would rise and fall. But ultimately, it was her own strength and resilience that would define her legacy. The Borgia name has been synonymous with scandal, intrigue, and ruthless ambition, and Lucrezia Borgia's life became irrevocably tied to this reputation. Born into a family where power and manipulation were the currency of survival, Lucrezia was both a beneficiary and a victim of her father's and brother's political games. while the Borgia family's rise to power was marked by strategic alliances, military conquests, and the cunning use of marriage. The darker side of their legacy, one characterized by violence, treachery, and betrayal, would forever alter Lucrezia's path. This darker legacy would haunt her for years to come, and it would be impossible to separate the woman from the rumors and scandals that swirled around her. The first major scandal to stain Lucrezia's reputation was the mysterious nature of her marriages. Although she was married 3 times, the circumstances surrounding her first 2 marriages, each one politically motivated and marred by rumors, would mark her as a woman whose personal life was less about love and more about the ambitions of the men who controlled her. Her first marriage, to Giovanni Sforza, was a political maneuver by her father, Pope Alexander VI, to secure an alliance with the powerful Sforza family in Milan. The marriage, though it appeared to be a solid political alliance, was quickly revealed to be a failure. Giovanni's lack of character and his inability to bring any real strength to the Borgia family's ambitions made the marriage dissolve within just a few years. But it was not the political failure that tainted Lucrezia's reputation, it was the public scandal that followed. Rumors began to spread that Giovanni Sforza had been impotent, that he had failed to consummate the marriage, and that the entire union had been a sham. The whispers about Lucrezia's first marriage cast a shadow over her image, and her father's decision to annul the marriage only fueled the speculation. The rumors of her supposed affair with a number of men, some real, some imagined, took on a life of their own, with the Borgia name becoming irrevocably linked to corruption, lust, and scandal. The fact that the annulment of her first marriage had been politically orchestrated only added to the public's perception that Lucrezia was merely a pawn in her father's grand design. Lucrezia's second marriage to Alfonso d'Aragona, the Prince of Naples, was an attempt to solidify Borgia power in the south of Italy and secure an alliance with the powerful Aragonese family. While it began with much promise, the marriage was fraught with tensions. Alfonso's growing mistrust of the Borgia family, particularly Caesar's increasing ambitions, created a volatile situation. Caesar's actions would soon bring the marriage to a tragic and violent end. In 1500, Alfonso was murdered under mysterious circumstances, though the true nature of his death has never been conclusively determined. Many historians believe that Cesare Borgia was directly involved in his murder. The murder, whether orchestrated by Cesare or not, further fueled the Borgia family's reputation for brutality and treachery. The fact that Lucrezia was left a widow under such suspicious circumstances only added to the rumors of her involvement in the crime, though there was no concrete evidence to support the theory that Lucrezia had been complicit. The scandal surrounding her second marriage deepened the perception that the Borgia family was a dynasty built on murder, manipulation, and betrayal. In the wake of Alfonso's death, Lucrezia was left to face the fallout, while her father and brother sought to maintain the family's influence and continue their political pursuits. Lucrezia struggled with her own guilt, grief, and public perception. The loss of her second husband, who, despite his political importance, had been a man she had learned to care for, was a devastating blow. The murder cast a long shadow over her, and the people of Italy were quick to judge her, associating her with the cruelty and violence that had defined her family's rule. The scandal surrounding the Borgias intensified in the public eye, and the family's reputation grew darker with each passing year. The rumors about Lucrezia's personal life continued to spread, and she was increasingly depicted as a femme fatale, a woman who used her beauty and charm to manipulate the powerful men around her. While much of the gossip surrounding her was likely exaggerated or fabricated, the whispers of her involvement in her husband's murder, combined with her family's notorious reputation, ensured that Lucrezia would never escape the shadow of scandal. But the true nature of the Borgia family's darker side extended beyond the rumors and gossip. While the Borgias were known for their political cunning and their ruthless pursuit of power, they also had a deep connection to the religious institution that they controlled. Pope Alexander VI, despite his excesses and moral corruption, was a deeply devout man who used the papacy to further the Borgia family's power. Yet, his papacy was also marked by the exploitation of the Church for personal gain. The Vatican under his rule became a hub of corruption, with family members filling key positions of power within the Church. using their positions to enrich themselves and eliminate rivals. Lucrezia, like her father, was deeply entwined with the papacy's political machinations. While she may not have wielded the same direct influence as her brother Cesare or her father, Lucrezia's role in securing alliances and managing relationships with powerful families placed her at the center of the Borgia family's empire. She played a vital role in helping to maintain the Borgia family's hold on power. But the moral compromises required for such a position weighed heavily on her. Despite the scandals and the darker side of the Borgia family's rise to power, Lucrezia's intelligence, charm, and political savvy were undeniable. She became an expert in managing the delicate balance between diplomacy and survival. And she used her position to secure her own place within the tumultuous political landscape of Renaissance Italy. But the toll of living under the constant weight of scandal and public scrutiny would not be easy to bear. By the time of her third marriage to Alfonso of Este, Duke of Ferrara, Lucrezia had become a more cautious, more measured woman. The tragedies and scandals that had followed her in her early years were not forgotten. But she had learned to navigate the treacherous waters of Renaissance politics with greater care. Her marriage to Alfonso d'Este marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. One where she would find relative peace and stability. But not without the continued burden of her family's legacy. Though the Borgia family's reign would eventually come to an end, the shadows of their darker side would continue to follow them. Lucrezia's life, forever intertwined with the notorious actions of her father and brother, would continue to be defined by the scandals and intrigues of the Borgia name. Yet, in the end, it was Lucrezia's resilience and ability to adapt to the ever-changing political landscape of Italy that allowed her to survive the tumultuous legacy of the Borgias and carve out a life of her own. The early years of the 16th century were filled with political turmoil, both within Italy and beyond its borders. The Borgia family, already established as one of the most powerful forces in Renaissance Italy, was increasingly embroiled in the shifting alliances, betrayals, and ambitions of the various city-states that populated the Italian peninsula. Lucrezia Borgia, though still young, found herself once again at the heart of these political intrigues. Her family's power, gained through her father's papacy and her brother Caesar's military campaigns, was about to be tested in ways that would affect her, her family, and the very foundations of the alliances they had so carefully constructed. At the center of the conflict was the Sforza family, which had once been an important ally to the Borgias. Lucrezia's first marriage to Giovanni Sforza, despite being politically motivated, had initially helped to strengthen the Borgia position in Milan. The Sforza family controlled Milan, and their connection with the Borgias was seen as a key to maintaining a balance of power in northern Italy. However, as the years passed, the Sforzas and the Borgias grew further apart. The marriage between Lucrezia and Giovanni was, from the start, a union of convenience, and it became increasingly apparent that it lacked the personal bond necessary to secure a lasting political alliance. By 1497, the Sforza family was no longer seen as an essential ally to the Borgias. Giovanni Sforza, once a promising partner for Lucrezia, was unable to live up to the expectations set by his father-in-law, Pope Alexander VI. His lack of political acumen and the failure of his marriage to Lucrezia to yield any significant benefits for the Borgias made the alliance seem pointless. The annulment of their marriage, after only a few years, was a bold political maneuver. While it had the effect of destabilizing the relationship between the Borgias and the Sforzas, it also opened the door for further political maneuvering. Pope Alexander VI's decision to annul the marriage would become a turning point in the Borgia family's relationship with Milan and, ultimately, the wider balance of power in Italy. The annulment of the Sforza-Borgia marriage was, in many ways, the first public crack in the Borgia family's seemingly unshakable control over the Italian political landscape. As Lucrezia's first marriage dissolved, rumors and scandals surrounded the circumstances of the annulment. Giovanni was publicly humiliated by the annulment and allegations that he was impotent, which only worsened the perception of the Borgias as a corrupt and manipulative family. While the Borgia family viewed this as a strategic move to strengthen their position, the consequences were felt more deeply than they anticipated. The public backlash, both in Milan and throughout Italy, sent shockwaves through the delicate web of alliances that the Borgias had so carefully constructed. Cesare Borgia, in particular, saw the collapse of the Sforza alliance as a personal and political failure. His military ambitions had been focused on expanding the family's territory, and the Sforzas had been a potential ally in these plans. However, with the collapse of the marriage between Lucrezia and Giovanni, Cesare had to quickly rethink his strategy. The tensions between the Sforza family and the Borgias were deepened, and the fragile alliance that had once tied the two families together was severed. But Caesar's ambitions were not easily thwarted, and he sought new alliances, both through diplomacy and military conquest. For Lucrezia, the fallout from her first marriage marked the beginning of a personal transformation. The annulment of her marriage to Giovanni Sforza had not only disrupted the Borgia family's political position but had also deeply affected her personally. She had been thrust into a public scandal that she had no control over, and the rumors surrounding her and her marriage became intertwined with the darker aspects of the Borgia name. As a young woman, Lucrezia was forced to confront the difficult reality that her personal happiness was not her own. Her marriages were political tools in the hands of her father and brother. Though the Sforza family was no longer an ally to the Borgias, Caesar's ambitions did not waver. He continued his military campaigns across central and southern Italy, hoping to consolidate power and extend the Borgia influence. With the Sforzas in disarray, Cesare seized an opportunity to expand his territory, particularly in the region of Romagna. His military campaigns, though successful, were not without controversy. His brutal tactics and ruthlessness in dealing with local leaders earned him both admiration and fear. But the Borgia family's expansion came at a high cost. The Sforza family, once an ally, now stood as an obstacle to Caesar's plans, and the eventual destruction of their power would come at a price, one that Lucrezia would ultimately pay. By 1500, Caesar's quest for control over Italy was becoming increasingly ambitious. His forces had taken control of several territories in central Italy, including the strategically vital regions of Romagna and the Marche. But as Cesare moved further south, into Naples and the Kingdom of Naples, his path would cross with a new force, the Aragonese family, whose influence in southern Italy was not easily overcome. In the midst of this political maelstrom, Lucrezia found herself once again caught in the crossfire of her brother's ambitions. Lucrezia's second marriage, to Alfonso d'Aragona, had been part of a larger plan to secure the Borgia family's hold on southern Italy. The Aragonese family, with its deep ties to the Kingdom of Naples, had been an essential ally for the Borgias. However, the tensions between the Borgia family and the Aragonese were palpable, and the political maneuvering in Naples would ultimately bring the marriage to a tragic end. Alfonso's murder in 1500, whether directly orchestrated by Cesare or not, marked a violent turning point in the Borgia family's quest for power. The murder of Alfonso d'Aragona sent shockwaves through Italy. Though Lucrezia's involvement in her husband's death was never fully proven, the scandal of his violent end further tarnished her already sullied reputation. She found herself a widow once more, caught between the rising power of her brother and the fractured political alliances that her father had so carefully built. The murder of Alfonso not only marked the destruction of her second marriage but also signaled the erosion of the Borgia family's once mighty power. In the aftermath of Alfonso's death, Lucrezia was left to navigate the complex web of politics that Cesare had woven. Her brother, having lost his father's papacy and facing mounting opposition from rival factions, was beginning to realize that his grip on power was slipping. The political landscape of Italy was rapidly changing, and the Borgia family's hold on the regions they controlled was weakening. The murder of Alfonso d'Aragona, which had once seemed a strategic move, now appeared as a catalyst for the eventual unraveling of Caesar's empire. For Lucrezia, the power struggles surrounding her family were no longer abstract political games, they were deeply personal battles. Her marriages had been used as tools of diplomacy, but they had also cost her dearly. The Sforza alliance had failed, and the Aragonese marriage had ended in violence. Her loyalty to her brother, Cesare, had never wavered, but she was beginning to question the toll that her family's ambition had taken on her own life. As Caesar's political fortunes continued to decline, Lucrezia's personal strength began to shine through. She was no longer just a pawn in her father's and brother's grand designs. Though her life had been shaped by the ambition and ruthlessness of the men around her, Lucrezia would come to carve out a space for herself, using her intelligence, grace, and diplomatic skills to navigate the tumultuous world of Renaissance Italy. The fall of the Sforza family was but one chapter in the ongoing saga of the Borgia dynasty's rise and fall. As Caesar's empire crumbled, and as Lucrezia's role in the family's ambitions evolved, she would come to understand that survival in a world defined by violence and betrayal required not only loyalty but adaptability. Her journey, which had begun in the shadow of her father's papacy, would continue, shaped by the political struggles of her family, but also by her own determination to survive and thrive in a world that offered little mercy to those who faltered. The death of Alfonso d'Aragona in 1500 marked the beginning of a new chapter in Lucrezia Borgia's life. She was once again left a widow, caught in the web of political ambition and family loyalty. With the murder of her second husband, a tragedy that had deeply scarred her, Lucrezia was not only mourning the loss of the man she had come to care for but also facing the devastating consequences of the violent, Machiavellian world she inhabited. Yet, despite the personal anguish that followed, she was soon faced with a new political reality, one that would require her to once again use marriage as a means of securing both her future and her family's interests. With Cesare Borgia's power beginning to wane and the Borgia family's political influence rapidly declining in the wake of her brother's military setbacks and the death of their father, Pope Alexander VI, Lucrezia found herself at a crossroads. While the Borgia name had once been synonymous with power, its reputation was now irrevocably tainted. The family's future, especially Lucrezia's, depended not only on loyalty to her brother but also on securing her place in a world where allegiances shifted rapidly. It was during this time of political uncertainty that Lucrezia's third marriage was arranged, and it would prove to be one of the most strategic and transformative of her life. In 1501, after the fall of the Sforza family and the tragic murder of Alfonso, Lucrezia was married to Alfonso d'Este, the Duke of Ferrara. The marriage to Alfonso of Este was more than a simple political alliance. It was a decisive move to ensure Lucrezia's survival in a rapidly changing political landscape and to offer her a fresh start in a court far removed from the chaos of the Borgia household. Alfonso d'Este was a nobleman of considerable influence, though not as politically powerful as some of the other men Lucrezia had married. He was the son of Ercole I d'Este, Duke of Ferrara, and his family held a strategic position in northern Italy. The d'Este family, though not as rich or vast in influence as the Borgias once were, held considerable sway in the region. For Lucrezia, this marriage represented an opportunity to escape the shadow of her family's scandals and carve out a more secure and stable life. It would also secure her position as Duchess of Ferrara, granting her a realm of her own, free from the turbulent politics of Rome. Lucrezia's marriage to Alfonso was arranged not only to provide her with stability but also to help her brother Cesare consolidate his position. At the time of the marriage, Caesar's power was faltering, and he needed as many allies as possible to secure his military and political ambitions. While Cesare had relied on his sister's previous marriages to further his goals, this marriage was, in part, a last-ditch attempt by Lucrezia to ensure the survival of the Borgia family in Italy's fractured political system. However, despite the political motivations behind the marriage, the union with Alfonso was significantly different from her previous ones. For one, Alfonso was a man of considerable charm and intellect, with a reputation for being more stable and less entangled in the violent ambitions that had defined Lucrezia's earlier life. While their marriage began as a political arrangement, it evolved over time into one of relative personal harmony. Lucrezia found in Alfonso a husband who, despite his own political ambitions, respected her intelligence and ability. Unlike Giovanni Sforza, whose incompetence had been a constant source of frustration for Lucrezia, and Alfonso d'Aragona, whose violent end had been a dark chapter in her life, Alfonso d'Este was a figure who brought a sense of peace and purpose to Lucrezia's turbulent existence. The marriage to Alfonso marked the beginning of Lucrezia's new life in Ferrara. As the Duchess of Ferrara, she became an influential figure in northern Italy, where she played a central role in the court's cultural and political affairs. Despite her family's fallen reputation, Lucrezia was able to forge her own path in Ferrara, transforming the court into a center of artistic and intellectual activity. She became known for her patronage of the arts, her intelligence, and her ability to navigate the delicate politics of Italy's smaller states. Ferrara, under her influence, flourished, however, as much as her marriage to Alfonso provided her with personal stability. It also came with its own set of political challenges. Alfonso d'Este, despite his charm, had his own ambitions, and the dynamics of their marriage were not always as harmonious as they appeared. Though the couple was generally well matched, the reality of political power in Renaissance Italy was never far from their lives. Their marriage became entangled in the larger politics of Ferrara and Italy. As both Lucrezia and Alfonso sought to solidify their position in a world that had already seen the fall of one powerful family. Lucrezia's role at court was increasingly influential. She took charge of the administration of Ferrara, which had once been a quiet, provincial duchy but now thrived under her guidance. Her patronage extended to the intellectual and artistic fields. She supported many artists, including the painter Raphael, and her court became a center for humanist thought. The changes she brought to Ferrara were significant, and she became a respected figure in her own right. Though still tied to her family's legacy, Lucrezia carved out a space for herself in the world of Renaissance politics, one that was free from the scandals that had once defined her. Despite the increasing stability of her new life, Lucrezia could not escape the turbulent past that continued to follow her. Her previous marriages and the rumors that surrounded her still cast a long shadow over her reputation. The whispers about her involvement in the deaths of her first and second husbands, particularly the tragic end of Alfonso d'Aragona, persisted in the public consciousness. Even in Ferrara, where she was highly respected, the echoes of her family's scandals continued to resurface. However, as time passed, Lucrezia found herself increasingly removed from the influence of her family. Her marriage to Alfonso d'Este allowed her to focus on her own legacy. Free from the relentless power struggles of the Borgia court, she was no longer merely the daughter of Pope Alexander VI or the sister of Cesare Borgia. She had become her own woman, a duchess in her own right, and an influential figure in the political and cultural life of Ferrara. Her life in Ferrara was marked by her growing independence. She bore several children with Alfonso, and while her personal happiness was often overshadowed by the political duties that came with her position, she found fulfillment in her role as a mother and as a patron of the arts. Ferrara, under her stewardship, became one of Italy's most vibrant courts, and her legacy began to shift from the notorious history of her family to something more positive, one associated with culture, intellect, and governance. In the end, Lucrezia's marriage to Alfonso d'Este became the turning point in her life. It marked the beginning of a period of relative peace and stability, one that allowed her to move beyond the shadow of her family's political machinations and scandals. While she would never fully escape the stigma of her early life, her role as Duchess of Ferrara enabled her to carve out a new identity for herself, one based on her own talents, achievements, and the personal relationships she built with those around her. Lucrezia's third marriage was a final act of survival in a world that had tested her at every turn. It allowed her to thrive in a court of her own, forging a path that was uniquely her own and laying the foundation for a legacy that would outlast her family's turbulent rise and fall. Despite the darkness of her past, Lucrezia Borgia had emerged into the light, forever changing the course of her own life and shaping the future of Ferrara. By the time Lucrezia Borgia married Alfonso d'Este and settled into her life in Ferrara, her brother Cesare Borgia was on the precipice of both military and political ruin. The rise of Cesare had been meteoric, his military genius and ambition had made him one of the most feared figures in Italy, and his control over vast territories seemed unstoppable. But as quickly as his star had risen, it began to fade, caught in a web of political betrayal, shifting alliances, and the death of the one man who had secured his power, their father, Pope Alexander VI. Pope Alexander VI's death in 1503 had been the pivotal moment that changed the trajectory of the Borgia family. With Alexander's passing, the papacy was thrown into disarray, and the careful political machinations of the Borgia family unraveled almost immediately. Caesar's primary source of power had been his father's position as pope. A position that allowed him not only to secure military victories but also to maneuver through the complex politics of Italy's various city-states. Now, without the protection of the papacy, Cesare was vulnerable to enemies both within the church and among Italy's other powerful families. Caesar's military campaigns, once viewed as brilliantly executed, began to falter in the absence of his father's influence. His grip on the territories in central Italy began to slip, and his enemies, long biding their time, began to strike back. Caesar's allies deserted him, and many of the territories he had once controlled, such as the Romagna and the Marche, fell into the hands of rival families or outside powers. Even his own army, once loyal to him, began to question his leadership. One of Caesar's greatest political miscalculations came with his attempt to consolidate power by acquiring the Papal States for himself. In the absence of his father's papacy, Cesare had aimed to take control of the very position that had given the Borgia family its unparalleled influence. However, this dream of papal control was never realized. The election of Pope Julius II in 1503, an outspoken critic of the Borgias, was a blow to Caesar's aspirations. Julius II, determined to rid the papacy of Borgia influence, launched a campaign to reclaim the territories Cesare had conquered, and the Papal States were gradually restored to papal control. Caesar's decline was compounded by the loss of his strongest allies. With the fall of the Sforza family, once key political allies, Cesare was left isolated in a political world where loyalties were as fluid as the shifting alliances of the Italian city-states. His trusted generals and advisors began to abandon him, seeking refuge with more powerful and stable factions. The territories that had once been under his command fell into chaos as local leaders fought for control. In 1504, Cesare was captured by the forces of the Kingdom of Naples, a moment that seemed to signal the complete collapse of the Borgia family's dominance. Though Cesare was eventually released from captivity, his reputation was irreparably damaged. His political career was in tatters, and his once promising future was now clouded by the failure of his military campaigns and the loss of his territories. The ruthlessness that had once been the hallmark of his success, his willingness to do whatever it took to achieve his goals, now worked against him. Italy's many factions, seeing Caesar's fall from grace, pounced on the opportunity to destroy whatever remained of the Borgia power base. For Cesare, this was a time of intense personal reflection. He had been so certain of his power and future that the fall was devastating. His once fearless determination had been replaced by a desperate drive to reclaim his lost territories. Yet, as the political landscape shifted, Cesare found that his military prowess was no longer enough to secure his place in Italy's volatile power struggle. It was during this period of decline that Cesare sought the help of his sister Lucrezia. Though their lives had taken very different paths, she now firmly entrenched in her new role as Duchess of Ferrara. And he struggling to retain any semblance of the power that had once been his, the bond between them remained strong. Lucrezia, ever loyal to her brother despite the controversies surrounding his name, sought to help him in whatever way she could. However, the political tides had shifted, and there was little that she could do to restore Cesare to his former glory. In the face of growing adversity, Cesare began to consider alternative routes for his future. Realizing that his ambitions of territorial conquest were no longer feasible, he turned to diplomacy. However, his reputation, tarnished by years of ruthless tactics, made him an increasingly unappealing ally. Even with Lucrezia's assistance, there was little chance of Cesare returning to the heights of power he had once dreamed of. He finally accepted the reality that his time had passed, and in 1507, Cesare Borgia died under mysterious circumstances while attempting to regain control of the city of Pamplona. His death marked the end of the Borgia family's political dominance in Italy. Though Caesar's decline was marked by personal tragedy and political failure, his legacy lived on through his sister, Lucrezia. While Cesare had sought to create an empire through military conquest, Lucrezia, through her political acumen and strategic marriages, had managed to carve out a respected position in Ferrara. As Caesar's ambitions crumbled, Lucrezia's own future became clearer. She would not follow in her brother's footsteps, ruthlessly carving her path through Italy's political landscape, but would instead build a legacy of cultural and intellectual achievement. Caesar's downfall was not just the loss of territory or the failure of his military ambitions. It was also the end of the Borgia family's influence as a whole. The family, once on the verge of ruling vast swaths of Italy, had been undone by its own overreach. Caesar's defeat left Lucrezia in an even more precarious position than before. While she had secured a stable life in Ferrara, the shadow of her brother's fall continued to loom over her. Yet, through it all, Lucrezia remained a figure of dignity. A woman who had survived the chaos of the Borgia family's rise and fall and forged a future of her own. Cesare Borgia's political and military decline marked the definitive end of the Borgia family's reign in Italy. His death left Lucrezia to navigate the shifting political landscape, and she would find a way to thrive in a world that had no room for the ambitions that had once defined her family. Caesar's failure was a testament to the fragility of power and the shifting allegiances of Renaissance Italy. But it also highlighted Lucrezia's resilience and ability to adapt, ensuring that her legacy would survive, even when her brothers had crumbled. By the time of Cesare Borgia's death in 1507, Lucrezia Borgia had already begun to shape her own future, one distinct from the violent, turbulent legacy of her family. No longer a mere pawn in the political schemes of her father and brother, Lucrezia had come to embody the resilience and adaptability that were necessary for survival in the volatile world of Renaissance Italy. Though her early life had been shaped by scandal, betrayal, and political necessity, the years following Caesar's downfall marked a period of personal growth and transformation for Lucrezia. Her marriage to Alfonso d'Este had provided her with both a fresh start and a stable foundation in Ferrara, a city-state in northern Italy. It was here, far removed from the intrigues of Rome and the chaos that had defined her earlier years, that Lucrezia began to establish her own identity, one not tied to the Borgia name but to the cultural and political renaissance of her new home. As Duchess of Ferrara, Lucrezia wielded considerable influence, overseeing the court's affairs and ensuring the prosperity of her domain. Ferrara, under her stewardship, became a center of humanist thought, artistic innovation, and intellectual exchange. Lucrezia's influence in Ferrara was vast. She became a renowned patron of the arts, supporting writers, philosophers, and painters who flourished under her guidance. The most famous artists of the time, including Raphael and Titian, found a welcoming patron in Lucrezia, and she played a key role in the flourishing of Renaissance culture in Ferrara. Her court became a haven for intellectuals, artists, and scholars, and Lucrezia herself was admired not only for her beauty but for her intelligence and her ability to navigate the complex political and cultural landscape of her time. Yet, as much as she immersed herself in the cultural life of Ferrara, Lucrezia also found solace in her role as a wife and mother. The birth of her children with Alfonso d'Este provided her with the opportunity to create a family that would be her legacy, a family that, unlike the Borgia family, would not be marked by violence and scandal. Her role as a mother was central to her identity during these years, and she poured her energy into raising her children in a more stable environment. Away from the power struggles that had defined her early life, her marriage to Alfonso d'Este, though arranged for political reasons, grew into a genuine partnership. While the political realities of Renaissance Italy still demanded that their marriage serve as a tool for maintaining power, the bond between them deepened over the years. Alfonso, a man of intellect and respect, became a steady and supportive partner for Lucrezia. Their relationship, though still marked by the necessity of political maneuvering, grew stronger as they worked together to navigate the challenges of ruling Ferrara. Their shared commitment to making Ferrara a center of learning and culture became the foundation of their marriage. And they both found fulfillment in the role they played in the larger political and cultural landscape of Italy. However, despite her relative peace in Ferrara, Lucrezia never fully escaped the shadow of her family's past. The scandals surrounding her first two marriages and the violence of her brother Caesar's rise and fall still lingered in the public imagination. She remained, for many, the infamous daughter of Pope Alexander VI, and her reputation was forever tied to the Borgia name. Yet, in Ferrara, she was able to carve out a space for herself, one where she was known not only for her beauty but for her intellect, her artistic patronage, and her political acumen. The woman who had once been reduced to a political pawn was now an influential figure in her own right. Lucrezia's later years were marked by a shift in her priorities. As her children grew, her focus increasingly turned to securing their futures and ensuring that they would not inherit the dark legacy of the Borgia name. She sought to instill in them the values of stability, intelligence, and culture, hoping that her own example of resilience and strength would guide them as they navigated the challenges of their own lives. Her role as a mother became central to her identity, and in many ways, it was through her children that Lucrezia found a sense of redemption, her chance to pass on a legacy of peace and prosperity. Yet, even in the peaceful years of her later life, Lucrezia could not completely escape the echoes of her early years. The history of the Borgias, marked by ambition, scandal, and ruthlessness, was never far from the public consciousness. But Lucrezia herself had become a different figure. Her work in Ferrara, her patronage of the arts, and her diplomatic efforts ensured that her name would be remembered not only in connection with the infamous Borgia family but also as a ruler, a mother, and a woman of strength and grace who had rebuilt her life from the ruins of her family's collapse. Lucrezia's personal growth was not just about overcoming the scandals of her past but about transforming the meaning of her own legacy. The Borgia name, once synonymous with corruption and bloodshed, would always be part of her identity. But in Ferrara, Lucrezia became a symbol of resilience, intellect, and the ability to adapt. She had survived the brutal machinations of her father and brother, outlasted the fall of their empire, and created a future for herself that was defined by her own choices and her contributions to the world of culture and politics. In the final years of her life, Lucrezia continued to oversee the affairs of Ferrara, nurturing the artistic and intellectual growth of her court and ensuring that her children would inherit a realm far removed from the tumultuous history of the Borgias. Though she would never be free from the stain of her family's past, she had rewritten her story, a story that was not just one of survival but of triumph. The woman who had once been a tool of political manipulation had become a powerful figure in her own right, a woman whose legacy would endure in the annals of Italian history. Lucrezia Borgia died in 1519, at the age of 39, having lived a life of dramatic contrasts. From the scandalous and turbulent beginnings of her youth, she had emerged as a respected ruler, a patron of the arts, and a loving mother. Her later years, though peaceful and fulfilled, were forever shaped by the complex history of the Borgia family. Yet, in Ferrara, Lucrezia found the redemption she had long sought. Her legacy, though forever tied to the name Borgia, would ultimately be defined by her own strength, intelligence, and ability to navigate the political and cultural complexities of Renaissance Italy. Her transformation from a mere political pawn into one of the most respected women of the Renaissance is a testament to her resilience and her ability to adapt to the changing world around her. Through her marriage to Alfonso d'Este and her stewardship of Ferrara, Lucrezia Borgia forged a legacy that outlived the scandalous history of the Borgias and endured as one of Italy's most enduring stories of personal redemption and strength. As the dust settled on the dramatic rise and fall of the Borgia family, the legacy of Lucrezia Borgia began to take on new meaning. Once seen as a symbol of scandal, manipulation, and ruthlessness, Lucrezia had gradually redefined herself as a woman of intellect, resilience, and cultural influence, while her brother Caesar's brutal and ambitious nature had led to his ultimate downfall. Lucrezia's ability to adapt, survive, and build a new life for herself had ensured her place in history. When Cesare Borgia died in 1507, his death marked the final chapter of the Borgia family's political influence in Italy. For much of his life, Cesare had been the star of the Borgia family's ambitions, ruthlessly carving out territories, fighting wars, and scheming to consolidate power. His rise had been meteoric, but his fall was just as swift, largely due to the loss of his father's papal protection and the shifting allegiances that he could no longer control. His quest for papal power and military dominance had consumed him, and with his death, the Borgia family's influence on the Italian peninsula was effectively over. Caesar's death was not just the end of his personal ambitions, but the death of the Borgia family's political empire. The lands Cesare had once conquered were reclaimed by various other powers, some absorbed back into the Papal States, others into the territories of powerful Italian families or foreign powers. Caesar's military genius, once feared by all, was rendered irrelevant without the protection of his father's papacy. In contrast to her brother's dramatic fall, Lucrezia's legacy was different. She had no military conquests, no bloody campaigns to leave behind as a testament to her power. Instead, she left behind a legacy of diplomacy, culture, and intellectual achievement. Under her guidance, the court of Ferrara became a flourishing center of Renaissance culture. Lucrezia, having outlived the scandals of her youth, was remembered for her patronage of the arts, her political wisdom, and the role she played in fostering an intellectual environment in Ferrara that attracted poets, scholars, and artists from all over Europe. Though her name would forever be linked with the Borgias, Lucrezia's later years allowed her to escape much of the infamy that her family had generated. The scandal of her early marriages, the murder of her second husband, and her brother Caesar's violent rise and fall, all faded into the background as she established herself as a powerful and respected figure in her own right. She was no longer just the daughter of a pope, nor the sister of a disgraced military leader. She had become a key political figure in Ferrara, where her legacy would endure long after her death. Her transformation was not immediate, nor was it without difficulty. She had lived through the betrayals, political maneuverings, and the public humiliation that came with her association with the Borgias. Her marriages, particularly the violent end of her second husband, Alfonso d'Aragona, had made her the subject of vicious gossip. Yet, over time, Lucrezia's resilience and intellect won her respect, and her court in Ferrara became known not only for its artistic achievements but also for its political stability. The stability that Ferrara enjoyed during her rule stood in stark contrast to the chaos that had marked the years of the Borgia papacy. Lucrezia's role as the Duchess of Ferrara became central to her legacy. In Ferrara, she worked tirelessly to foster an environment where education, art, and politics could thrive. Her patronage of the arts was unmatched, and she supported artists, musicians, writers, and philosophers who would shape the intellectual and artistic movements of the Renaissance. Artists such as Titian, Raphael, and Bellini found a home at her court, where they were commissioned to create works that would become iconic in the world of Renaissance art. But beyond this, she established Ferrara as a place where learning flourished. Lucrezia was not only a patron but also an intellectual force in her own right, contributing to the development of humanism and education in Italy. Despite the many challenges of her earlier life, including being married off for political gain and living through the violent ambitions of her family, Lucrezia had emerged as a respected ruler and figure of great influence. Her survival, not just physically but politically, was a testament to her inner strength and determination. She had outlived the fall of the Borgia family, transcending the reputation that had been foisted upon her by circumstances beyond her control. In the later years of her life, Lucrezia's role in Ferrara became more than just one of political leadership. She also embraced her role as a mother and a symbol of stability for her children. Though the shadow of the Borgia name would always loom over her, Lucrezia worked tirelessly to ensure that her children would not inherit the violent and scandalous legacy of their grandfather, Pope Alexander VI, or their uncle, Cesare. Her children would grow up in a court that valued culture, art, and intellectualism, and she would pass on to them the lessons of resilience and adaptability that she had learned in her own life. By the time of her death in 1519, at the age of 39, Lucrezia's life had come full circle. She had survived the worst excesses of her family's power, outlived the scandals that once threatened to destroy her, and built a legacy that would be remembered for its contributions to the cultural and intellectual life of the Renaissance. Lucrezia was no longer merely the scandalous figure of her youth but had become a woman whose name was linked not only to the Borgia family but also to the cultural flowering of Italy itself. Her death, while tragic for her family and Ferrara, marked the end of an era. But even after her passing, the legacy of Lucrezia Borgia continued. She had transformed from a political pawn into one of the most respected women of the Renaissance. A ruler in her own right, and a patron whose influence was felt far beyond the walls of Ferrara. The name Borgia, for so long synonymous with scandal and treachery, would eventually be overshadowed by the achievements of Lucrezia herself. In the end, Caesar's death, which marked the final collapse of the Borgia family's political ambitions, also served as the catalyst for Lucrezia's personal transformation. While her brother had sought to build an empire through force, she had built a legacy through intelligence, resilience, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. The Borgia family's influence may have been extinguished, but Lucrezia's legacy, one rooted in culture, stability, and grace, would live on for generations to come. The story of Lucrezia Borgia is a tale of transformation, of survival against overwhelming odds, and ultimately, of the redemption of a name that had been cursed by scandal, betrayal, and ambition. Born into the tumultuous world of the Renaissance, a world in which power was everything and loyalty often came at the cost of personal sacrifice, Lucrezia's life had all the makings of a tragedy. She was born into the notorious Borgia family, whose rise to power was marked by ruthlessness, manipulation, and bloodshed. Her father, Pope Alexander VI, was a man who used the papacy not just for religious control but as a means to secure his family's dominance. Her brother, Cesare Borgia, was a brilliant but violent military leader whose ambition led him to the heights of power and ultimately to his downfall. Yet Lucrezia, unlike her father and brother, managed to escape the traps that ensnared them. Though she was bound by the political machinations of her family, she was also a woman who learned to navigate the treacherous waters of Renaissance Italy with intelligence, grace, and resilience. Her journey was not without hardship. Her marriages, all of them politically arranged, were fraught with scandal, violence, and tragedy. She endured the dissolution of her first marriage to Giovanni Sforza, which tarnished her reputation, and the violent death of her second husband, Alfonso d'Aragona, whose murder cast a shadow over her name for years to come. And yet, through it all, Lucrezia's strength and ability to adapt allowed her to emerge from the ruins of her family's ambitions to forge a future on her own terms. Her third marriage to Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara, was the turning point in her life. Though initially arranged for political purposes, it became a genuine partnership that allowed Lucrezia to reinvent herself as the Duchess of Ferrara. In this role, she was able to escape the chaos and scandal of her early life and create a lasting legacy of culture, diplomacy, and intellectual achievement. Ferrara, under her stewardship, became a center of artistic and intellectual flourishing, and Lucrezia became a respected patron of the arts, supporting great artists like Titian, Raphael, and Bellini. She built a court where humanism thrived, and her influence spread far beyond the walls of Ferrara. By the time of her death in 1519, at the age of 39, Lucrezia had outlived the worst of her family's excesses. She had rebuilt her life from the ashes of the Borgia name, not as a symbol of scandal, but as a woman who had carved out a place of significance in the history of the Renaissance. Her legacy, though forever tied to the Borgia name, became one of cultural and intellectual achievement, political resilience, and maternal devotion. Lucrezia's life was one of contrasts. She was the daughter of a pope whose reign was marked by corruption and nepotism, the sister of a man whose ambition knew no bounds and who ultimately fell from grace. She was a woman who had been forced into marriages that were not of her choosing, who had witnessed the collapse of the family's political power, and who had survived scandal after scandal. But in the end, Lucrezia Borgia transcended the dark legacy of her family. She built a future for herself that was not defined by the sins of her past, but by her own contributions to the culture and politics of Italy. Her legacy is not just one of survival but of transformation. Lucrezia's ability to adapt to the changing political landscape, to use her intelligence and charm to build alliances, and to create a cultural legacy in Ferrara is a testament to her strength of character. Her survival in a world dominated by men and by the ambitions of her father and brother is nothing short of remarkable. And perhaps most importantly, Lucrezia's story is one of redemption, a redemption not just for herself, but for the name Borgia, which had been tainted by the actions of her family. In the end, Lucrezia Borgia stands as a symbol of resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. She was born into a family defined by ambition and scandal. Yet she managed to forge her own path, one that would be remembered not for the crimes of her relatives but for the grace, intelligence, and strength with which she overcame them. Her life, though marked by tragedy and turmoil, was ultimately one of triumph, a triumph of personal growth, cultural achievement, and maternal love. As history continues to look back at the Borgia family, it will undoubtedly focus on the scandalous, the ruthless, and the ambitious. But within that dark legacy, Lucrezia Borgia's story shines through as one of transformation and empowerment. She emerged from the shadows of her family's notorious history to create a legacy that would endure far beyond the limits of her time. A legacy defined not by the sins of the past, but by the strength and wisdom of the woman she became. In the end, Lucrezia's story is one of hope, that even in the face of power, scandal, and overwhelming adversity, one can rise above the circumstances of their birth and shape their own future. Her legacy, though forever tied to the name Borgia, is one of redemption, grace, and survival, a powerful reminder that it is never too late to reinvent oneself and to leave a lasting mark on history.